My mom told me I was a failure. She said I'd never amount to anything, that I'd probably end up broke, jobless, maybe in jail. Her words cut like shrapnel and stayed lodged in me for years, but I did something she never expected. I didn't fight her. I didn't argue. I just left. And 25 years later, I pinned on the stars of a U.S. Navy Admiral. This is how it happened. My name is Charles Chuck Weller, born in 1955, small town, Pennsylvania. I grew up just outside Scranton. Railroad country, hard winters, harder fathers. My mom raised 3 of us after Dad died in a mining accident when I was 9. She was tough as nails and twice as sharp. She cleaned houses during the day, stocked shelves at night, and still had the energy to call us out on our BS. My older brother Ray was the golden boy. Football captain, valedictorian, Penn State scholarship. My sister Karen was the dependable one. Quiet, steady honor roll. And me? I was the kid who never quite fit, always asking questions in class, drawing in the margins of my homework. I built model airplanes while Ray was scoring touchdowns. I dreamed of oceans, carriers, and cockpits, things far beyond the steel and soot of Scranton. I was 17 the day she said it. We were in the kitchen. I had just flunked a math test, again, and the guidance counselor called to suggest I consider a trade. My mom stood by the sink, cigarette burning down between her fingers, and just stared out the window. And then she said it. "You're not like Ray. You're not going anywhere, Chuck. You're a failure. I don't know what else to say to you." She didn't scream it. That made it worse. It was calm, cold, like she'd accepted it, like it was already fact. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not until I was outside, walking nowhere in particular, with my fists in my coat pockets and my chest burning. That day stuck to me like tar. You don't forget the first time your own mother gives up on you. For weeks, I barely spoke. I stopped turning in homework. Teachers stopped calling on me. Even Karen gave up trying to cheer me up. But then something strange happened. I was walking past the VFW hall on Main Street and I saw a poster in the window. It showed a Navy destroyer slicing through the waves, and below it, in big block letters, "It's not too late to become someone you're proud of." I stood there in the cold, staring at that poster, and for the first time in months I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I still had a shot at something. The next week I cut class and took the bus to Wilkes Barre to meet with a Navy recruiter. His name was Chief Ramirez, a stocky Filipino guy with a crooked smile and a voice like gravel. "Son," he said, looking me over, "you're a skinny beanpole with bad grades and a chip on your shoulder, but you walked in here. That tells me something." He handed me a pamphlet about the Naval Aviation Academy. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood this. The Navy didn't care who your brother was or what your mom said about you. If you passed the test and passed the training, you belonged. So I signed up. 2 months later, I left Scranton with 1 duffel bag, $42 to my name, and a steel resolve wrapped in every painful word my mother had ever spoken. Great Lakes, Illinois, January 1973. Let me tell you something, nothing prepares you for Navy boot camp in the middle of a Midwestern winter. It was cold, brutal, and louder than a freight train. But I didn't care. I was there to survive and to prove something. Not just to my mom, but to myself. I wasn't the fastest runner. I wasn't the strongest swimmer, but I was relentless. While other guys cracked under pressure, I stayed sharp. Every push-up, every 4 a.m. wake-up, every barked order, I welcomed it. Because I wasn't just trying to pass, I was trying to rewrite who I was. 6 weeks in, something happened that changed everything. One of the drill instructors, a grizzled chief named DeMarco, pulled me aside after an endurance run. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he said, "Weller, You don't say much, but you don't quit either. That's rare. That's leadership. I'd never been called a leader in my life. That one word did something to me. It lit a fire I didn't even know was still alive. That night I stayed up reading the Navy manual by flashlight. The next day I volunteered for every damn thing. Navigation drills, deck training, extra PT. I had a new purpose now. Prove I wasn't the failure she believed I was. They said I wouldn't make it past the first year. Too skinny, too soft, too much baggage. But I made it through boot camp, and I wasn't stopping there. Because when you've got nothing to prove to the world but everything to prove to yourself, you find a way. Graduation day at Great Lakes was cold and gray, but I don't remember the weather. I remember standing at attention, crisp blues on, cap in hand, heart pounding. My mom didn't come. No family did. But I still stood tall. Because that day, for the first time in my life, I had earned something on my own. After boot, I was sent to aviation machinist's mate school down in Millington, Tennessee. I didn't know a damn thing about jet engines, but I soaked it up like a sponge. I spent nights elbow deep in manuals and mornings covered in grease. Guys around me complained. Me? I was grateful. I had a bunk, 3 hot meals, and a path forward. That was more than I ever had back home. After training, I got assigned to the USS Kitty Hawk, an aircraft carrier steaming out of San Diego. Now let me tell you, if you've never stood on a flight deck with F-14 Tomcats roaring over your head, your boots rattling on the steel, you haven't felt the Navy. I was 20. My whole world had shifted. I was part of something big now, something with purpose. But even then the doubts crept in. I still heard her voice sometimes. "You're a failure, Chuck." That whisper would sneak in at night when the deck went quiet and the stars stretched across the Pacific. And every time it did, I used it, turned it into fuel. Rage, maybe, or grit, I don't know. But it worked. On Kitty Hawk, I met Lieutenant Dan Hargrove. He was a naval aviator, Vietnam vet, and the first person who looked me in the eye and said, "You ever think about becoming an officer?" I laughed. I told him I didn't have the grades or the pedigree. He said, "That's not what I asked. I asked if you thought about it." I hadn't. But that night I did. That simple question planted a seed. I started reading more, paid attention to how the officers moved, how they spoke, how they led. I watched Hargrove especially. He was calm under pressure, even when a bird caught fire landing on the deck. He got us through it. No panic, just leadership. That's when I realized I didn't want to just survive in the Navy. I wanted to lead. Getting commissioned as an officer isn't easy, especially when you come from the enlisted side. But I didn't expect easy. I applied to the Seaman to Admiral, STA 21 program. Got rejected the first time, and the second. But I kept grinding. On my third try, I got in. It meant going back to school full-time. Naval science, engineering courses, early mornings, late nights. I was 27 by then. Most of my classmates were fresh out of high school. But I didn't let it show. I graduated with honors and got my gold bars. Ensign Charles Weller. I sent my mother a photo in uniform, standing proud in front of the flag. She never responded. But that didn't matter anymore. That day wasn't about her. It was about me. My first deployment as an officer was on the USS Roosevelt in the Red Sea. Desert Storm was still fresh in everyone's minds and tensions were high. I was a junior officer with a division of mechanics, fuel handlers, and logistics techs under my command. Most of them were older than me. Some didn't trust a Mustang, an enlisted guy turned officer. But I didn't try to impress them, I just worked hard. I listened. I showed up early, stayed late, got my hands dirty. Little by little, they saw I wasn't some clipboard cowboy. One night, our fuel line ruptured during refueling ops. Could have caused a fire, maybe even a catastrophe. I coordinated the response, locked down the leak, and evacuated 2 injured sailors to sickbay. That night, the XO called me into his office. "Ensign Weller," he said, "you kept your head when it mattered. That's what the Navy needs." I wasn't flashy. I didn't give speeches or pound my chest, but I got noticed. My name kept coming up in evals. I was offered slots in training schools, leadership programs, even language immersion. I never turned one down. Why? Because every opportunity was a step further from the failure I was supposed to be. And somewhere in the middle of that climb, something changed. I stopped trying to prove her wrong and started trying to prove myself right. By the time I was 37, I had 2 deployments under my belt, was leading over 200 sailors, and had earned my gold oak leaf. But leadership isn't about the medals on your chest. It's about who you are when the shooting starts, or when someone you trust stabs you in the back. In '92, I was assigned as executive officer aboard the USS Mason, guided missile destroyer, part of Carrier Strike Group 8. We were deployed in the Persian Gulf, supporting operations during the tail end of Southern Watch. I was no longer the kid from Scranton who couldn't pass math. I was a full lieutenant now, responsible for morale, discipline, and operational readiness. It wasn't about pushing paper. It was about knowing your people. I made it a point to know every sailor's name in my department, where they were from, who had kids back home, who was struggling. You lead people by understanding them. That's something they don't always teach in the manuals. But in the Gulf, things get real fast. One night, just off the Kuwaiti coast, we got word of a fast-approaching contact. Small craft, no flag, no radio. Possible pirate, possibly worse. We went to general quarters. My division snapped into action. We armed the 50 cals, closed watertight hatches, locked onto the target. The small craft turned out to be a fishing boat, but it was loaded with fuel drums and electrical wiring. Probably smuggling. Possibly something worse. We didn't fire. They turned. But that night reminded me, leadership in the Navy isn't just about procedures, it's about pressure. What you do when you've got 300 lives depending on your call. Back in Norfolk, I was promoted to lieutenant commander. That's when things really started moving fast. I was selected for joint duty training, then temporarily assigned to Naval Intelligence Command. That's where I learned how the Navy really works. Across agencies, alliances, and battlefields most Americans never see. And while the job was thrilling, the politics? Not so much. I had a colleague. We'll call him Commander R. We came up together. He was sharp, charismatic, the kind of guy who always found a spotlight. We worked side by side during a joint intelligence operation in Djibouti. We were tracking arms moving through East Africa. Tight operation, delicate work. But one day, out of nowhere, I got pulled in by NCIS. "Commander Weller, we have questions about some reports you submitted last month." What? Turns out Commander R had falsified part of a logistics manifest, then pinned the blame on me. It nearly tanked my entire career. I was placed on limited duty pending investigation. They pulled my clearance, grounded my team. My reputation, gone in a week. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could hear was my mother's voice again. "You're a failure." But I didn't lie down. I gathered every document, every piece of email, every communique I had logged. I worked through the night for weeks, building my defense with the same tenacity I used to get through boot camp. In the end, NCIS cleared me. Commander R was reprimanded and transferred quietly. That's how the system works sometimes. But I'll never forget how quickly a man's career, his honor, can be put in the crosshairs. I lost my shot at early promotion that year. Lost trust in a few commanding officers, too. But I gained something more important. Resolve. They reassigned me to Pearl Harbor. No command role this time. Just a planning billet. Most guys would have seen it as a dead-end post. But I used the time wisely. I built new systems for logistics tracking, trained up-and-comers on how to lead under pressure, re-earned trust, one sailor at a time. A year later, I was offered command, the USS Porter, my first ship, my crew, my responsibility. I stood on that deck as we pulled out of harbor, and I remembered everything, my mom's voice, the recruiter's crooked smile, the gulf, the betrayal, the climb. And I knew something for sure. I belonged. I had my own command now. A destroyer at sea, responsibility for hundreds of lives and 20 years behind me. But I wasn't done, not even close. Because some missions you don't talk about. Some promotions you don't campaign for. You just earn them in the shadows. Commanding the USS Porter was everything I'd worked for. She was a guided missile destroyer built for speed, stealth, and power. I led 275 sailors across oceans, through storms, and into combat drills that tested every bit of our training. There were no shortcuts. You lead from the front, you walk the decks at Oro 400, you eat last, sleep last, and take the blame first. That's command. We ran escort missions in the Mediterranean, tracked Russian subs in the North Atlantic, and worked alongside NATO partners in operations that never made the papers. Some of our best work didn't make headlines, and that's how it should be. In late 2003, I got a call from a Rear Admiral in Washington. "We've been watching your work. We'd like you to come home." Home, in this case, meant the Pentagon. I was skeptical. I wasn't a desk guy. I didn't do politics well. But when the Navy taps you, you go. So I reported for duty as a strategic operations advisor, and that's when I entered a world most people don't even know exists. The next few years were different. I worked in secure rooms without windows, reviewed intel that turned my stomach, planned operations that had to go exactly right or people died. One of those operations was in Somalia, supporting SEAL teams tracking al-Shabaab leadership. I won't go into detail. Can't. But I'll say this. I watched 23 Americans go into the dark and 23 come home, because planning matters, and leadership matters. I also learned that the most dangerous battles don't happen with bullets. They happen in back rooms, policy meetings, and briefings with nervous politicians who've never been shot at. That's where I learned diplomacy and restraint. But with command comes weight, real weight. In 2006, one of my sailors, Petty Officer LaGrange, was killed during a boarding operation off the Horn of Africa. A smuggler panicked, fired before the team could disarm him. LaGrange was 24, newly married, quiet kid, liked chess. I still remember the letter I had to write to his wife, the phone call I had to make. Nothing prepares you for that, nothing should. You don't forget their names. Not ever. In 2008, I got promoted to captain. The same year, I was assigned as Chief of Staff for Carrier Strike Group 5 out of Japan. That was the proving ground. Managing logistics, planning operations, handling personnel issues across thousands of sailors, it was like juggling lit dynamite. But I loved it. I also had to walk a fine line. You're senior enough to be noticed, and junior enough to be targeted. Every move mattered, but I kept my compass steady. I remembered what I'd learned from the deck plates. Show up, shut up, do the work. That's when the flag officers started calling me Admiral Material. I didn't let it go to my head, because I remembered where I came from. And then, after nearly 3 decades in uniform, something happened I never expected. I was back in the States for a leadership panel at Annapolis. Afterward, a woman approached me outside the auditorium. She looked older, tired, familiar. It was my mother. She tracked me down through a cousin. She didn't say much at first, just looked at me in that uniform, chest full of ribbons. Then she said, "I was wrong, Chuck. You weren't a failure. You were just stronger than I ever knew." We sat in silence for a while. Then I walked her to her car. We never became close, but that day, There was closure, and sometimes that's enough. You don't wake up one day and become an admiral. It's not just a title, it's a lifetime of sacrifice, of failure, of clawing your way forward when no one believes in you. And when those stars were pinned on my collar, all I could think about was the boy my mother called a failure. I was 54 when my name landed in front of the Navy's Flag Officer Selection Board. It was a long shot. There were 37 candidates, all sharp, all tested in combat or command, and most of them had better political connections than I did. But I had something they didn't. 3 decades of leading sailors. From diesel decks in the Gulf to briefing Pentagon brass in classified briefings, I had earned every inch of that journey. Still, I didn't expect the call. But it came, a quiet, direct voice from the office of the Chief of Naval Operations. Captain Weller, the President has approved your promotion to Rear Admiral Lower Half. Welcome to the flag. The day they pinned those stars on me, I didn't smile. I didn't cry either, I just stood still. Not out of pride, but out of gravity. Because I knew what those stars meant. Responsibility, visibility, no more second chances. Every sailor under your command becomes your family. Every order you give carries consequences. I thought about all the people who got me there, Chief Ramirez, Lieutenant Hargrove, Petty Officer LaGrange, even Commander R, and yes, my mother. She never lived to see me promoted. She passed a year before, but maybe that's why it hit me so hard. Because she didn't believe in me, until I did. As Rear Admiral, I was placed in charge of Joint Task Force Pacific Logistics. A beast of a command covering supply chains, war readiness, humanitarian ops, and contingency planning. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. When typhoons hit the Philippines, my teams got food and shelter there in 48 hours. When a carrier's engine died in the South China Sea, we rerouted parts through 3 countries in 5 days. Behind every battlefield win, there's a logistics officer who hasn't slept in a week, and I was damn proud to lead them. That Christmas, I went back to Scranton. First time in over a decade. Snow was thick. The streetlights flickered like they did when I was a kid. I drove by my old high school. It was smaller than I remembered. That guidance counselor who told me to consider a trade, his name was still on the alumni wall. I laughed, not out of spite, just perspective. I walked into a small VFW hall downtown, sat at the bar. A couple of older vets recognized the stars on my collar. "You Navy?" one asked. I smiled. All my life, my last active duty assignment was bittersweet. I was appointed Deputy Director of Naval Strategy, a fancy title that meant I spent a lot of time in rooms where the air was stale and the decisions were heavy. I helped draft the Navy's long-range force posture in the Indo-Pacific, sat across from ambassadors, testified before Congress. But I never forgot who I was. I still visited sailors on the pier, ate chow with enlisted kids, talked to the chiefs. Because you don't lead from a PowerPoint. You lead by showing up. I retired with 36 years of service, 3 wars, 4 commands, over 1,000 sailors under my watch, 2 presidential citations, and 1 mother who never thought I'd make it. At my retirement ceremony, they played the Navy hymn. I stood there in full dress whites next to my grown son, now a lieutenant himself. He leaned in and said, "You did it, Dad." I nodded, but in my head I thought, no. We did it. Every sailor, every crew, every voice that doubted me. That was the day I finally took a breath and let the weight go. I never set out to become an admiral. I set out to prove that I wasn't worthless, that I mattered. And when I hung up that uniform for the last time, I realized something. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every kid who was told he wouldn't make it. Retirement didn't hit me right away. For 36 years, I'd woken up at 05:30, made my bunk tight enough to bounce a quarter, and reviewed my crew's readiness reports over black coffee. Suddenly there were no orders, no calls, no salutes, just silence. But I didn't hate it. I'd earned that silence. Still, after a few months, I knew I wasn't done serving. I just had to serve differently now. I started giving talks at high schools, trade schools, and military prep programs across the country. Places like small-town Indiana, South Texas, West Virginia. Places full of young men who'd been told, "You're not going anywhere," just like I had. I'd walk into those gyms, big voice, starched blazer, and a slide deck full of jets, carriers, and the American flag. But I never led with the Navy. I led with the truth. I was called a failure at 17. My own mother said I wouldn't amount to anything. But I didn't listen. I joined the Navy with $42 in my pocket. 36 years later, I walked out an Admiral. Not because I was special, but because I didn't quit. And when I said that, the room always got still. Because every kid in that crowd had someone they were trying to prove wrong. Now I get letters. Not from Pentagon brass or Navy command. From 18-year-olds in Kentucky. From 22-year-old single moms in Arkansas. From veterans battling demons they can't name. They say, "Sir, I watched your story. I thought I was a screw-up. But you made me believe maybe I still have a shot." Let me tell you something, my friend. There is no medal in the Navy, no ribbon, no promotion that feels better than that. Because that's legacy. If you're watching this and you're over 60, maybe you've served. Maybe you didn't. Maybe life didn't go the way you thought it would. Maybe you've made peace with that. But I want you to hear this. It's not too late to leave a mark. We still have something to give, our stories, our lessons, our scars. These younger generations, they don't need superheroes. They need truth-tellers. They need us. I've got a grandson now. His name's Jake. He's 6. He likes spaceships, not ships. Wants to be an astronaut. I love that. One day he asked me, "Grandpa, were you always brave?" I smiled. I told him the truth. "No, Jake, I wasn't brave. I was just stubborn." Brave is what they call you when you show up scared and do it anyway. So here's my last thought. I spent most of my life trying to run from a sentence my mother said in a tired kitchen one winter morning, but maybe I should thank her. Because every insult, every doubt, every time someone said, "You'll never," that became fuel. And maybe, just maybe, some of us need that fire to find out who we really are. Being told you're a failure doesn't make it true. What matters is whether you keep showing up every day, especially when no one believes in you. Because belief starts with you. You don't have to be a Navy admiral to win at life. You just have to keep moving forward 1 inch at a time. The only thing that separates you from success is quitting. So don't quit. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone or gave you hope, do me a favor. Like the video. Subscribe for more stories that matter, and leave a comment below. Tell me who you're still proving wrong or who helped you find your fight. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's leave something behind that matters.